The wind gnawed at the cliffs like a starving wolf. Sea mist veiled the sky in gray sorrow as the old monastery clung to the rocks, its stones damp with centuries of grief. The bell rang at dawn, not jubilant, not summoning, but as if tolling for something long dead and still mourned. Below its cracked iron tongue, robed figures emerged from shadow, their hoods hung low, sandals whispered on wet stone, and breath curled in the air like incense from forgotten prayers. In the smallest cell, a flame trembled. Brother Aldrich knelt like a broken reed before it, bones thin beneath his habit, lips cracked from too many nights without sleep. His gray eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had looked too long into something he was never meant to see. 3 nights haunted by visions too cruel for dreams, ravens circling a burning chapel, blood seeping endlessly from a golden chalice, choirs with no mouths, only weeping. His body remained kneeling, but his soul wandered places no man should tread. Once, he had been the kingdom's prized illuminator. His fingers had danced across vellum, weaving saints and serpents in Byzantine gold. Kings requested his hands. Priors begged for his faith. But that winter, long and bitter, something changed. He'd been working late beneath the flickering warmth of candlelight, hunched over a codex bound in hide too stiff for comfort. It smelled of ice and salt, and the distant east. Hidden within beneath a palimpsest of prayers and genealogies, lay a prophecy inked in rust-red strokes. The lion's crown shall fall by the hand that wears no ring. He read it once, then again, then a third time as the wax dripped silently. The words did not change, but something within him did. Cold fingers tightened around his heart. The prophecy was not metaphor, it was declaration. He brought it to the prior, with shaking hands. A warning, he whispered. A warning not from men but from the abyss. The prior's face turned to stone. Keep it buried, he said. Some truths are not meant for parchment. But Aldrich's mind had already begun to rot with revelation. His sermons turned to riddles. His manuscripts became dark, almost violent angels bleeding into beasts, temples crumbling, kings crowned with fire. At court, they laughed. The king, once a brother to the monastery, and fond of Aldrich's stories, dismissed him with sorrow. He sees ghosts where there are none, he told his council. Let him be. But not all dismissed him. The queen's confessor listened, and whispered still, until the queen, long suspicious of her brother's ambition, began to tilt her gaze. That winter, her brother vanished, no screams, no farewell. The frost took him, or something worse. A knight was found hanging in the chapel rafters, eyes wide with unspoken confession. Whispers, like mildew, spread. The king's eyes grew dull, the guards stopped laughing, and in the monastery, Aldrich heard the saints weep through the stone. Each night, the wind brought new sounds, keys turning where there were no locks, sandals pacing where no feet should fall. The abbey's silence had a shape now. It pressed against the soul like wet cloth on the mouth. Aldrich stopped sleeping, not from fear, but from duty. He feared what his mind might bring back if it drifted again into that place of ink and fire. Outside his window, the monastery bell, once the voice of heaven, now hung silent and cracked, a broken tooth in a mouth of stone. A single crow perched on the rusted arch. Its cry split the air like a torn veil. Aldrich flinched. He no longer wept for the prophecy. That was only the beginning. He wept for what his belief had awakened. What lay beneath the kingdom's polished marble floors and perfumed halls had stirred. And now, it was moving. He remembered a dream, perhaps a memory of fire leaping from the altar, consuming scrolls, melting chalices, devouring robes, until the monastery stood naked and skeletal, and above it, a figure cloaked in shadow, wearing no crown, no ring, yet all knelt before it. In the stillness, Aldrich whispered, "Forgive me," but silence offered no absolution. Far below, at the edge of the sea where black rocks pierced the surf like jagged teeth, a boat approached. Its sail bore no crest, its oars did not splash. The monks did not see it, but Aldrich knew. A message was coming, or a messenger, Perhaps both. He rose, body trembling, and pressed his hand to the cold stone wall. Once these stones had felt warm when children learned Latin under torchlight, when kings came barefoot to confess, when music filled the cloisters. Now they shivered. He turned back to his candle. The flame still danced, weak but alive. He cupped it gently, whispering not a prayer, but a memory. When the lion sleeps, the shadows gather. A phrase he had once written in the margins of a forgotten manuscript. A phrase that now meant everything. He knew the court would not survive. Not as it was. The queen would strike before being struck. The king would flounder in his grief. The crown would tumble not by war, but by unraveling faith. And he, Aldrich, son of no one, monk of nowhere, was now a herald of the dark. He did not ask for it. He had only sought truth. But truth, once unearthed, is not content to stay silent. A knock at the cell door, soft, twice. No monk would disturb him at this hour, not after the visions, not after the voices. He turned. The candle flickered sideways, though no wind had entered. Aldrich, came a voice, barely above breath. He has sent for you. He opened the door to a hooded figure, taller than any monk he knew, the face hidden, the robes foreign. Around his neck hung a simple token, a lion, carved from obsidian. Aldrich stepped into the corridor. And the sea wailed beyond the stones. Shadows clung to the walls like old guilt. The stranger turned. Come, he said. The queen waits. No more questions, no more visions, only the road ahead. As he stepped into the chapel, its once vivid glass now gray with salt and time, Aldrich felt something shift, as if history had inhaled. He did not know what came next, only that the crown no longer mattered, only that something older than monarchy was awakening. Behind him, the crow took flight, and the candle at last went out. It began with the scent of damp parchment and incense. The scriptorium breathed like a cloistered lung, shallow, reverent, heavy with the dust of 100 silent years. Light leaked in through the narrow slits in the stone, not with grace, but with suspicion, painting gold across cold stone, as if hesitant to bless what lingered within. Brother Aldrich sat hunched beneath this ancient light, ink pooling beneath his fingers, breath caught between fear and duty. The vellum before him trembled, as if it too feared the task. Words bled from his quill with unnatural haste, guided by hands that no longer felt like his own. He did not copy, he translated, he conjured, he transgressed. It was said the gospel had been buried beneath a chapel swallowed by earth and fire, a heretical thing, dug up by accident, or perhaps by fate. Only one among them was deemed worthy to read it, to make sense of its whispers. Aldrich, whose tongue had never spoken above prayer, whose mind was believed too meek for corruption. But the meek, it turned out, were not safe from visions. They came not in dreams, but in the gaps between candle flickers. In the curling smoke, he saw beasts masked as saints. In the margins of scripture, he drew angels with eyes closed in mourning, dragons emerging from cathedrals, their wings inked in grief. He began to hear voices not his own, not voices at all, but a language that slithered into his blood, Latin words he had never learned, truths he had never sought. They spoke of a kingdom rotting beneath divine pretense, a child born in silence, who would carry light into ruin, and a monk who would mistake revelation for redemption. Aldrich believed it was a trial not of punishment, but of purpose. God tests his vessels with fire, he told himself, and so he let the gospel speak. He let it consume the ink, the margins, his nights. When at last the manuscript passed to the royal archivist, its pages shimmered with a fevered artistry. What had once been words became prophecy. What had once been prayer, now wore the cloak of rebellion. The king looked upon the manuscript with a gaze sharpened by suspicion. He saw in it not faith, but accusation. The angels wept too much. The dragons coiled too near the crown. The faces of kings bore thorns. This monk draws rebellion, he muttered, and none dared challenge the whisper of a monarch. The manuscript was sealed by torchlight, its cover bound in wax and iron, but already, it had taken flight. Copies whispered through noble halls. A famine followed dry earth cracked beneath starving feet, and mothers buried children with lips cracked in prayer. The kingdom, once unshakable, now murmured of judgment, and Aldrich was banished. He walked for days without blessing, his sandals worn to nothing, until he reached the priory perched upon the cliff's edge, where the sea gnawed at stone like time itself. It was a place of exile, not peace. There he was left to pray. But prayers turned to questions, and questions grew teeth. Each night, he dreamt of fire behind stained glass, a cathedral ablaze, its spire collapsing into ash. He heard bells tolling where no rope was pulled. He saw cloaked figures gathering beneath blood-colored moons. His hands, once steady, shook even in sleep. One night, the wind brought with it a scent not of salt but of smoke. He awoke to the bells toll again, but the tower stood still. No monk stirred. The fire was not real, yet the omen was. He stepped barefoot onto the frost-bitten stone outside, his breath meeting the sea air like a final offering. Clouds wheeled above like raven wings. The sea below screamed against the cliff. He whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for silence. He had sought truth, and in its mirror found madness. The gospel had not revealed salvation, but consequence. Words, once divine, had become plague. His ink had sown doubt into soil, long starved of certainty. In the stillness of exile, he realized the weight of revelation. Truth is not a gift, it is a burden, one that reshapes the world whether ready or not. And Aldrich was its unwilling herald. Behind him, the priory's stone cast long shadows that stretched like chains across the frost. He did not return to his cell. He walked past the chapel, where the crucifix now seemed to avert its gaze, down toward the edge, where cliff met sky. He remembered the symbols that had shimmered on the vellum, not as warnings, but reflections. The kingdom had not feared heresy, it had feared recognition. The gospel did not reveal evil, it unmasked it. As he stood there, wind clawing at his robes, he did not weep, he did not pray, he simply listened to the sea, to the silence, to the echo of a bell that never rang. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the fog that wrapped the world in secrecy, a rider galloped through winter fields, clutching a copied page, one that bore the weeping angel, the crowned dragon, and the truth no longer hidden, because truth, once seen, cannot be sealed. And so it traveled page by page, whisper by whisper, toward cities not yet burning, toward kings not yet overthrown, toward a child born in silence, and toward the chapter yet to unfold where belief itself would tremble beneath the weight of prophecy. The candle flickered once, then held steady, a fragile sun trembling in a crypt of shadows. Brother Aldrich knelt before the tombs, his breath shallow in the cold, holy rot. Beneath him, the bones of saints slept in silence, wrapped in the dust of forgotten centuries. The air tasted of old prayers and beeswax. His lips parted, but no prayer came, only a single name, lost in his throat like a stone, Lucian. The dream still clawed at him. A boy crowned in ash, his feet bare upon a ruined dais, lightning etched across his brow. Aldrich had not merely seen it, he had been it. The smoke, the shouts, the crown all thundered in his skull like monks' bells struck out of rhythm. He had told the prayer with trembling hands and parchment eyes. But faith, once stretched too far, snaps quietly. The prayer had smiled the same thin-lipped mercy he gave the mad or dying. And yet, something darker had taken root. The bishop's visit, the whispers it birthed, the queen's gaze lit with hunger for meaning, all spiraled from that dream like ivy through stone. The letter had confirmed the worst. A kingdom unmoored, a queen, desperate to bend fate, a nephew, hidden in straw, now whispered of as divine. And blood, always the price of prophecy, misunderstood. They say you began this, the words still echoed, months old and ash singed. He had burned the letter in the refectory's brazier, its embers clinging to his robes like curses, but the guilt would not burn. It settled deep marrow deep and walked beside him like a silent twin. Outside, Autumn gnawed at the world. Trees wept their leaves like tired courtiers, shedding robes. Crows gathered on the chapel's cross, black sigils against a bruised sky. Aldrich wandered the cloister, robes thin against the wind, prayer beads worn smooth beneath his fingers. He did not eat. The hunger anchored him. Each step a small penance, each pang a prayer unanswered. The other brothers watched but did not stop him. Some feared him now, others revered him, as fools revere lightning. On the seventh night, he locked himself in the nave, fasting, flogging, kneeling until his knees split. He traced the saints' faces on the stained glass with bloodied fingers. One of them, a woman holding a broken chain, wept in the candlelight. Or perhaps it was the wind, catching the flame just so. Stillness settled, thick and sacred. And then the door creaked. He did not turn. "I will not speak more of visions," he whispered. A figure knelt beside him. The bishop, unrobed, unannounced, his ring removed. "Brother," he said, "you never needed to. The dream has already spoken." The bishop's voice was hoarse, like old wood bending under weight. He spoke of the queen's exile, of the nephew spirited away to the Western Isles, raised now among fishermen and drunkards, watched by spies and saints alike, of a country cleaved, half longing for prophecy, half choking on its aftermath. "You were right, Aldrich," the bishop murmured. "But rightness is not always holy." They prayed together not to undo what was done, but to bind it tighter. Some truths, once seen, must be made sacred or dangerous. This one had become both. When dawn broke, Aldrich wandered past the garden where frost rimmed the cabbages like iron. He watched the cook scoop ash from the oven, her hands cracked from cold and bread. Smoke curled up, thin and white, into the morning's blue. Ash again, he thought. It followed him. He found solace only in the scriptorium. Ink, at least, obeyed. He copied psalms, slow and deliberate, each word a penance. But even here, the world's hunger bled in. Margins filled with notes from brothers, debating the prophecy, arguing over the beggar king's meaning. Some believed he was a false messiah, others saw him as the second coming. Some had already taken oaths in his name. In a letter from a southern monastery, a monk claimed to have met the boy now 12, wild-haired and curious, prone to dreams and strange laughter. "He weeps when it rains," the monk wrote, "and speaks in riddles when touched." Aldrich folded the page without reading further. The dream had taken root, it bloomed now in places he could never reach. One night, as snow teased the windows and wolves howled in the hills, he returned to the crypts. He lit no candle this time. He walked by memory, each step measured, each breath held. Before the bones of the first abbot, he knelt once more. "I did not mean to move kings," he whispered. "Only to be still." He wept until the stone beneath him was wet. Then he heard it, not a voice, but a presence, like breath on the nape of the soul. "Some doors open only once, brother, and once passed, they never close." He did not sleep that night, nor the next, but on the third night, in the high tower where bells once rang, he began to write. Not psalms, not visions, but memories. He wrote of his youth, of laughter before silence, of a time before the abbey, when he had danced with a girl named Ellen, by a river that now ran black with silt. He wrote not to warn, but to remember, for memory, he realized, was the only prayer untainted by ambition. Below, the kingdom healed in strange ways. A new heir was named, a cousin born of quiet stock, raised by stonemasons, and taught by monks. The queen, once fire-eyed, now wandered barefoot in a nunnery by the sea, humming lullabies to birds. Her brother's name etched in no record, save one hidden in Aldrich's notes, ink over ink, scratched out, but never forgotten. And the boy crowned in ash. He was seen once years later, barefoot still, walking through a plague-struck village. He touched a fevered child, who did not die. No one dared follow. Legends coiled around him like mist, the beggar, who would never be king, but always be watched. Aldrich, old now, gray-bearded and slow, sat beneath a cracked fresco in the library. Children of the nearby village came to him sometimes, asking for stories. He never gave them the dream, only parables, only silence. And on the eve of his death, he dreamed once more not of thrones or crowns, but of a field of ash turned to snow, and a child laughing, barefoot, unafraid. He smiled. A door had closed, another had opened. The night fog rolled over the moor like a funeral shroud, swallowing trees, tombs, and towers alike. Somewhere in the black heart of that mist, the bell of St. Grimoald rang 13 times, a number not known in any liturgy, a number the dead might count if they still had breath. Its tone bled through the forest like a wound reopening, and though it stirred the brothers in their beds, rustling cassocks and whispered prayers, Brother Aldrich did not rise. He was already kneeling, spine arched like a bow drawn too long, his fingers white around the relic pressed to his ribs, a bone brittle, yellowed, once part of a rib cage said to belong to St. Cailan, who had died cursing the kings of old with his final gasping breath. But it was not the saint's curse that kept Aldrich trembling, it was the echo of something else, something older than saints and kings. 3 nights passed, beneath the cloister where damp stones whispered forgotten sins. Aldrich had descended into the crypts, seeking silence. He had not found it. Behind a caved-in arch, his lantern had revealed a strange glimmer, not gold, nor glass, but something like bone, wrapped in iron wires that pulsed faintly, as if still alive. The moment he touched it, pain split him open from spine to skull. His mouth foamed, eyes rolled back, voices filled his head, not one, but many. Some screamed, some wept, some sang. When he woke, he had carved into the stone with his own nails, his blood painting each groove. Let the crown weep. He showed no one, but guilt, like smoke from an incense burner, cannot be hidden for long. He copied the phrase into a letter and sent it to Lord Selin, once his companion in youthful theological debate, now a disillusioned noble nursing a hatred of courtly lies. The words did not stop there. In parishes far from St. Grimoald, priests began murmuring of divine betrayal. In villages, children pointed at the king's crest and laughed. Statues of the royal line were found toppled, their heads shattered and scattered like fallen fruit. Then came the Inquisition. They moved like shadow and fire, red-robed, faces veiled, blades dipped in blessed oil. They did not ask questions. Monks were dragged from their beds, beaten with crosiers, drowned in holy water until their lungs gave confession. The abbot was found hanging from the belfry, robes twisted like a noose. Aldrich fled that night, barefoot and bleeding, his censer clutched like a lifeline, a pouch of crushed herbs his only medicine. He ran until he could no longer feel his feet. He ran until even the saints stopped following. He hid in the caves beyond the stone bridges of Nerith, places where light forgot to enter, and beasts refused to nest. There he dreamed without sleep. Visions poured from the darkness, a crowned skull crowned again with flame, a throne buried under roots, a child born with ash for breath. He tried to pray, but the censer's smoke curled into shapes he did not recognize. Once it took the form of a weeping face, mouth open, but silent, and when he touched it, the vision returned. He woke beside a tree with bark like flesh. In its trunk, he scratched once more. Let the crown weep. His fingernails split, the bark bled. That was when he knew. This was not a saint speaking through him. Saints do not bleed trees. Saints do not seek vengeance. Saints do not sing in many voices at once. He feared the relic had opened a door that should never have existed. And worse, that he had been but a herald, a vessel, temporary, disposable. Someone else had already been chosen. He could feel them waking now. He did not know where, in a temple, a dungeon, a castle nursery, but they would hear the voices too louder, clearer, and unlike him, they would not tremble, they would not run, they would rise. From the ravine, Aldrich moved only at night, following old pilgrimage paths now overgrown and silent. His robes, once white, were black with soil. Birds ceased their songs when he passed. Children wept in their cradles without knowing why. In one ruined chapel, He found a monk burned into the stone floor, his shadow charred forever into the tiles, hands raised in terror. Above him, someone had painted with blood, "The crown weeps, not it devours." Aldrich dropped his censer. He did not retrieve it. There are moments in a man's life when faith becomes fear. When the line between martyr and madman blurs, Aldrich no longer knew where he stood. He only knew the ground beneath him was cracking. On the fifth night, he reached the hollow of Calmere Hill, once a royal burial ground, now desecrated. The tombstones were uprooted, bones lay chewed and scattered, like kindling. But in the center stood a single obelisk, untouched, humming faintly. Aldrich knelt before it. He wept not from sorrow, but relief. It was over. He had carried the message. The words had taken root. He was no longer needed. And in the mist above the moor, something began to sing again, not with pain, but joy. The kind of joy that follows ruin. The kind of joy wolves feel when they smell blood in snow. Aldrich bowed his head, whispering one last time, "Let the crown weep." Behind him, the fog split. A figure stepped forward, barefoot, robes drifting like torn banners, eyes glowing like coals beneath ash. They did not speak. They did not need to. The crown had already begun to fall, and the next chapter, whatever it would be, had already found its voice. The monastery's refectory was hushed, as winter snow clung to the narrow windows. Brother Aldrich's spoon clinked once against his bowl before he set it down. The broth tasted of ash. His eyes drifted again to the mural above the hearth. The Last Judgment, angels and sinners ablaze in eternal flame. But something had changed. The eyes of the angel no longer gazed toward heaven. They looked down, straight at him. He blinked. Once, twice. But the gaze did not shift. No one else saw it. The silence thickened, broken only by the slow chew of bread and the faint crackle of the fire. Brother Ewan whispered a grace under his breath. Brother Matthias shivered though the room was warm. Aldrich clenched his fists beneath the table. The world had tilted. He felt it, as one feels the moment before lightning strikes. The tension, the charge. That night, the hallucinations returned. A child's laughter drifted from the graveyard, light and unburdened, though no child had lived within these walls in a generation. A crow landed on the windowsill, and uttered, in crisp Latin, "He weeps who binds the word." Aldrich froze, sweat slicking his robe, and when he lit a candle in the dormitory corridor, he watched as crimson wax bled down the brass, staining it like fresh murder. He whispered prayers, then forgot the words. Halfway through, each vision eroded the scaffolding of his mind. Stone by stone, he sought comfort in confession. In the small dark chamber beneath the chapel's ribs, he spoke tremulously of these sights, but the prior's tone, once fatherly, turned cold. "Visions," the prior said, "are a privilege granted only to the devout." Aldrich had never doubted harder than in that moment. The snows deepened. The bells rang hollow in the mist. And Aldrich, once scribe, once teacher, once obedient lamb, found himself alone, even among brothers. One dawn, beneath a shroud of fog that blanketed the valley like death's own breath, he stole into the abandoned sacristy. The place stank of mildew and forgotten incense. Candles had long since melted into hardened lumps. Cobwebs clung like veils over the stone saints, and yet it called to him. With trembling hands and stolen pigments, ochre scraped from old frescoes, lapis crushed beneath stone, he began to paint. He painted not as a monk, but as a man possessed. On the damp, crumbling walls he etched a faceless king, his crown sagging, a broken sword drooping from limp fingers. He painted a nun, her eyes hollow, her rosary coiled like a serpent around her throat. A tower stood cracked under the eerie crescent of the moon's shadow, a fracture that ran like a wound through heaven itself. Each image came not from imagination, but from revelation. Aldrich did not create, he remembered. Each stroke of his brush bled dread and beauty, and though his hands trembled, they did not falter. He sealed the room when he left, not with lock or key but with silence. No brother spoke of it, yet somehow all sensed that something within the monastery had shifted, until one day, a merchant came. Sent from the capital for restoration work, he strayed into the sacristy. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps fate. What he saw scorched his soul. He returned not with brushes but with whispers. Within weeks, nobles spoke of the cursed murals hidden in stone cloisters. The faceless king was taken as omen. The strangled nun as prophecy. The cracked tower as a symbol of divine fracture. The kingdom was brittle. Rebellion bloomed along the borders. Crops rotted in soil that once sang with wheat, and the king aging, desperate, haunted looked for a scapegoat. It was found in Aldrich's hand. Blasphemy, the king's decree thundered. Heretic work bred by a deluded monk. The abbey was condemned, not just the sacristy, all of it, the bells, the altar, the bones buried beneath the nave. On the day of the burning, the flames reached higher than the spire itself. Smoke rose black into a sky that did not weep. The brothers fled or perished. Some stood defiant in the cloisters, singing psalms as the roof collapsed in ash. But Aldrich was already gone. No one saw him leave. Some claimed he walked into the holy river, white robe trailing like a bridal shroud, and vanished beneath the ice. Others whispered he traveled from village to village, cloaked in rags, preaching under burnt gallows and beside war-bled roads. Wherever he went, he left no trail, only echoes. Yet the murals did not die. Novices, in terror or awe, scraped fragments onto parchment before the flames claimed them. A wing here, a bleeding hand there, a sword half-finished etched into the back of a wooden plate. These fragments became talismans. A northern duke had the faceless king etched onto the goblet, from which he drank before battle. A queen in the east stitched the strangled nun into her mourning gown. Children were born beneath ceiling slates that bore the moon-shadowed tower. They became belief, not the organized belief of churches and kings but raw belief, primal, a belief that skipped priests and kissed the soul directly. And so the kingdom turned inward. Fear became prayer, guilt became ritual, dread fed devotion. Aldrich, the monk no one listened to, had become more than a man. He had become a mirror, and each who looked into the mirror saw their own doom reflected back. The murals no longer spoke prophecy, they became it. They moved like shadow between nobility and peasantry, stitched into tapestries, tucked into crypts, buried in dreams. Centuries later, a child playing beneath a ruined castle would find a sliver of parchment. A flame-haired nun, lips parted in silent scream. The child would bring it to a local priest. The priest, upon seeing it, would weep and say nothing. No one knows if Aldrich died, but sometimes just before dawn, in ruins where ivy creeps and birds will not perch, one might see the faint outline of a robed figure, brushing paint against stone, not creating, not imagining, just remembering. And when the wind shifts, carrying the scent of smoke and snow, some swear they can hear a whisper, "We are what we fear, and what we fear we become." Beyond the ruins, far into the valley, a bell tolls, once, hollow, then silence. But it is not the end, for from the east, word spreads of a blood-red comet and a bishop whose eyes burn like fire, and somewhere, beneath the cracked bones of empire, something begins to stir, something that remembers. The high tower of St. Ethelred's Abbey swayed in the storm like an old oak, ancient, groaning, uncertain of its grip on the earth. The wind howled through the belfry like wolves circling their prey. Lightning cracked the sky with silver veins, each flash pulling the world into stark, unnatural clarity. There, among the trembling stones and the cold breath of storm, stood Brother Aldrich. A candle flickered in his hand, defiant and frail. His robe clung to his body like wet paper, and his eyes, those wide, sleepless eyes, watched the heavens, not with awe, but with dread. Beneath the rolling hills, far off, the capital crouched in the rain. Its spires emerged and vanished in the mist, like ribs of a buried giant. He had seen this storm before. Night after night for 40 days he had dreamed of it, of fire in the sky and stone turned to ash. Always, the tower broke. He had told them, whispered it first, then shouted it, when silence brought no peace, but warnings wrought fast in sacred halls. The abbot had only chuckled behind his beard. Visions are not commands, Brother Aldrich, he said. They are the child's shadow cast upon the wall. And so Aldrich wrote instead. Night after night, ink smeared with trembling hands, he traced the fire, the queen's weeping eyes, bleeding red, the church walls crawling with vines, the black dog circling the throne like a sentinel of doom. He folded those dreams into a letter and sent them through cold fingers and quiet guilt to a cousin at court, a minor clerk with an open ear. He did not think it treason, he thought it prayer. A prayer that someone somewhere might believe. But belief is a threat in gilded halls. The letter never reached its mark. It was opened by another. The king's confessor, gaunt and pale, read the ink as one might read poison in wine. To dream of the crown's fall, he hissed before the fire, is to will it. The parchment burned in his hand like judgment. And so the soldiers came. They wore iron like wolves wear hunger. They tore through the abbey like plague through a wound. The journals, those fragile children of Aldrich's visions, were cast into the courtyard and set aflame. He watched them burn, page by page, like the wings of moths consumed mid-flight. He was spared the sword, but not punishment. They called it mercy. Exile to the north, to the ruined chapel near the borderlands, where wolves outnumbered men, and rot whispered from the rafters. He arrived beneath a bruised sky, the wind moaning through broken shutters, and stood in the silence of a place forgotten even by its ghosts. There, among broken pews and crumbling stone, Aldrich rebuilt, not with pride, but with the numbness of duty. He found wood from old carts and bones from the nearby field, skulls unearthed by years of rain. He fashioned an altar, rough and cold, and lit a candle once more. And they came, first the curious, then the afraid. Word drifted through the hills of a monk who had spoken fire into being, the monk of lightning, they called him. Some brought offerings, moldy bread, wilted flowers, a dead chicken wrapped in cloth. Others brought questions, trembling like candles in wind. He did not promise salvation. He offered only truth. There will be betrayal, he said. Once, his voice like rusted bells, and blood beneath the throne. They listened. In the capital, a cousina, different cousin, poisoned a duke at feast. The queen miscarried beneath a blood moon, and the tower, Saint Ethelred's own heart, caught fire during vespers. They said it was lightning. They said the flames leapt like beasts from stone to spire. Monks screamed prayers that died in smoke. The bells melted. Those who survived spoke the name of Aldrich with fear. He saw it, they whispered. He knew, but Aldrich no longer rejoiced in foresight. With each truth proven, he felt a deeper wrong. It clawed at his ribs like guilt born of silence. Because the visions had changed, now they came not in sleep, but in waking hours, in the scratch of rats behind stone, in the creak of the chapel door, in the twitch of candlelight, as if the flame itself flinched from what lay ahead. He dreamt not only of ruin now, but of a dark mirror of himself, in robes not of sackcloth, but of velvet, seated beside kings, mouth open, hand outstretched. A prophet welcomed by thrones, not cast from them. And in this dream, cities burned because he told them to. He began to fear the dreams were no longer warnings, but blueprints. And so one evening, as thunder groaned like a dying ox and the villagers huddled in silence around the altar, Aldrich stood apart. He held the candle, watched the flame flicker like doubt. His voice, when it came, was softer than wind. "Forgive me," he said, "not to the people, not to the wind, but to whatever lingered beyond it all." He whispered it again as he lit the altar's flame. The smoke curled toward the rafters, black as ink, heavy as sin. Because sometimes, to see the future is not to stop it, but to pull it closer. To dream of fire is to strike the flint. And in the end, Aldrich wondered not if he was cursed, but if he had become the curse. And yet far beyond the hills, in the capital's inner court, a girl no older than 12 read the monk's last remaining page, a scrap, saved by wind, buried in straw. It spoke of vines in the church wall, of blood upon the altar, of a crown swallowed by shadow. She folded it, and tucked it beneath her cloak, because sometimes, a vision is not a curse, sometimes, it is a torch, and the night ahead would be long. Morning mist curled around the cloister arches, like breath held too long. Brother Aldrich walked barefoot along the frost-kissed stones, the hem of his robe whispering over dew-laced moss. His fingers were tucked in his sleeves, not for warmth, but reverence, as though holding in a prayer too fragile for air. Above him, the rafters loomed like ribs of a great sleeping beast. That was where he first heard it. A voice, dry as parchment, soft as the last gasp of a dying candle. It did not speak in words. It murmured in warnings a kingdom swallowed by silence, a prayer that was never dared, a fate sealed in the absence of sound. He had risen before dawn, trembling. The voice clung to him like cobwebs, yet it did not feel like madness, it felt ordained. So he stopped speaking. 40 days passed. The sun shifted, the bells tolled, the novices whispered, but not a word fell from Aldrich's lips. In his cell, he scratched lines and curves across parchment symbols like fragments of dreams, diagrams like the machinery of spirits, faces half-formed, like echoes of saints or devils, glimpsed in sleep. Every stroke bled meaning, every page pulsed like a wound. The other monks feared him. The prior, white-bearded and bent, wept one dusk as he stood over Aldrich's scrolls. Why desecrate God's parchment with riddles? He asked, voice broken, but Aldrich only lowered his eyes, as if the answer was etched not in words, but in the spaces between them. Then, a ripple, a novitiate no older than a season's harvest copied the strange symbols in secret and passed them to his brother, a page in the king's court. At first, it was idle curiosity, but then came recognition. The markings they matched an extinct heretical sect, buried generations ago, or so they thought. Whispers spread through the court, like ink in water. The old faith stirred in its grave. The king, gaunt and watchful, ordered a purge. Not of swords, but scrolls. Scriptoriums were stormed, shelves overturned, quills snapped, monks bound and beaten, their screams echoing against stone sanctuaries. Under torchlight, pages curled and blackened. Holy words and heretical glyphs alike fed the flames, indistinguishable in ash. They came for Aldrich at dusk. He did not resist. He knelt in his cell, bare knees pressed to stone, eyes wide not with fear, but knowing. When they seized his hands, he did not cry out. When bones cracked beneath iron rods, he did not speak. Even as his writings were torn and fed to fire, his lips remained sealed. They cast him into a mountain cell, a hollow carved into ancient rock, where sun never dared, and winds whispered secrets too old for men. But silence had already begun its pilgrimage. Far beyond the cloister walls, a strange quiet took root. In abbeys, sermons trailed off, bishops forgot verses mid-breath, letters arrived half-finished, as if language had slipped through fingers. Confessors paused at the altar, and never resumed. Even the court jester known to mock plague and execution with the same grin, ceased to laugh. He sat one feast, lips twitching, eyes hollow, and simply watched. It was not fear, it was not illness, it was something deeper, a hush, older than kingdoms, a stillness creeping through the soul. And in that mountain cell, Aldrich smiled. Blood crusted the corners of his mouth, his hand twisted and broken like a gnarled branch, but his eyes glowed not with victory, but understanding. The voice he'd heard it was never meant for words, it had spoken through silence all along. The scribes had tried to trap it in ink, the priests, in psalms, but silence does not obey, it slips through doctrine, it thrives in the unspoken, and it was patient. In the dark, Aldrich listened, not to echoes, but to absence. No chains, no prayers, just breath, and bone and rock. The silence filled the hollow places inside him, it became him, and across the realm, as frost gave way to thaw, as banners fluttered limp in windless skies, something began to wither. Councils ended without decrees, treaties were signed and never read, The queen, once a fierce diplomat, now stared long at her goblet before answering even the simplest of questions. Children played games without rules, fathers forgot lullabies, words still existed, but they had lost their grip. One morning, a bishop climbed the pulpit and opened his mouth, but found only dust. The congregation sat, unmoving, their eyes fixed not on him, but beyond, as if waiting for something greater than speech, something already inside them. Back in the mountains, Aldrich dreamt. He saw veiled figures gathered again around a throne, not gilded, but shrouded in mourning cloth. Their hands, once folded in mock devotion, now trembled. One by one, they tried to speak, but no sound came. They clawed at their throats, their eyes wide with the realization they had lost the language of power, not by sword, not by plague, but by stillness. For what is a kingdom, if not built on command, on decree, on oath and order? Strip it of voice, and it crumbles like old mortar. Aldrich woke to the sound of dripping water, a single drop echoing like thunder. He watched it strike stone, again and again, precise, eternal. It was a rhythm beyond time, a liturgy of silence. He knelt once more, this time, not in resistance, but in reverence. Not all wars are fought in noise, some are won in the quiet where truth hides, where prophecy waits. Outside, the wind rose, it slid through the cell's crevices, not cold, but curious, as if tasting what remained. It brushed Aldrich's brow like a benediction, and far below, in the valleys and cities and keeps, the hush thickened. Some resisted. They held feasts louder than ever, trumpets blared, town criers shouted hourly, but it was hollow, a frenzy without faith. And slowly, their throats grew hoarse, their voices cracked, until even the loudest among them began to pause, mid-word, as if remembering something they'd never known. Aldrich had not slain kings, he had not lifted sword nor cast spell, he had listened, and that was enough. Now deep within the mountain, he closed his eyes, and for the first time, wept, not for pain, not for loss, but for the terrible, beautiful quiet that had answered his faith, the silence that would outlive him. And from the valley below, a rider approached, cloak torn, eyes sunken, bearing scrolls wrapped in linen. He sought the monk of the mountain, he carried questions, and fear. The silence was not done, it had only just begun to speak.